Welcome to the Essential Craftsman Podcast. I'm Nate, and I'm very happy to bring you this interview with Tom Lipton. Tom is a lifelong metalworker. He started when he was 9 years old, welding in his basement with his dad, and he's taken this trade to the very highest possible level. He works at the Berkeley Lab and is standing and working shoulder to shoulder with scientists and physicists and engineers, creating machinery that are solving big kind of global problems and research that's just frankly beyond my understanding or even comprehension. For example, they build particle accelerators, and they have this lab. This is the lab where 13 of the periodic elements were discovered. So you can kind of do the math and see what this guy's all about. He's kind of on several levels past most machinists that I've bumped into. I couldn't be more happy to bring this interview to you. Tom talks about his background, how he approaches learning and thinks about it, and a little bit about his YouTube channel, and he's just really a treasure of a man. Without any further ado, my discussion with Tom Lipton. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time on a Christmas break to have this call with us and our audience, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
With machining especially, I've noticed the online community, or I guess even just on YouTube, the network of machinists and shop guys seems especially high quality. Why do you think that is? Is that just the way it worked with YouTube and such, or is it that way with machinists generally?
No.
Or what do you attribute that to?
I don't know. I think it's some of it's shared experience, right? And in the shop, now you can literally get a pretty high quality machining education by watching videos and interacting with the people that are producing content and putting it out there, right? And
so I've wondered about machinists, speaking about why the community is kind of positive, and there's certainly another level, maybe several more layers of education that exist in machining, as opposed to being an electrician or a plumber, for example. In other words, you got to be pretty smart to make it far in machining, right? Do you think that's true?
No, I don't think so. Like any apprenticeship, right? If you go the formal route and you do an apprenticeship, right? There's shop level mathematics, and you're going to do some trig and some algebra and stuff like that. If you do a formal thing. Now, I've met a lot of machinists that are really crappy at math. Okay, and they've found ways of kind of getting around those things. And now with, phones and online triangle calculators and all that stuff, it's just kind of irrelevant now, right? And almost. And once again, that kind of really fast access to good information, right at your fingertips really makes a difference, right?
Yeah, that's true. Almost like the ability to look up the information is just as valuable as if you can file it all away. Just knowing how to go after it is in and of itself a valuable skill.
Exactly. Like, your dad, right? He's a builder, right? And I don't know, I was doing something. I built a shed, years ago, right? And I was like, I wonder, for this span, what centers and what depth of, do I need 2x6s or 2x8s or 2x10s, or, what is the proper thing? Bink, bink, bink on my phone. 2 minutes later, I'm at Home Depot, buying 2x8s, right? And because that's what I need for this kind of floor loading and, et cetera, right? And
it's also kind of important to not compare yourself to someone else if you're starting out. For example, I was watching some of your videos, and it's so far beyond the basics that I'm instantly just feel like I could never possibly understand. And for an apprentice, that's probably a mistake. You got to start at the beginning before you expect. Just because you can listen to a conversation doesn't mean you should be able to understand the whole thing also.
The people that I work with at work are so far above me that I just feel like pond scum, literally, right? And But they keep coming into my office to talk to me for some reason. So, I'm like, okay, well, they haven't kicked me out of here yet. I'm still getting the paycheck. So it's all good. Right. And you,
Well, you're really humble. And let's talk about your shop in a minute here. Go ahead, though.
if you think you know everything, you've just closed the door to learning. Right. And
Yeah.
so, if you have where's the camera? A closed fist, right? You can't receive anything, right? You can't hand me anything. You have to have an open hand, right? And to receive. And I don't know. I had a couple of experiences when I was much younger, right? That kind of drove home a couple of points, right? That you can learn from anybody, and regardless of what their standing in society is, right? There's a lot to be learned by machinists and carpenters and stone cutters and whatever from other trades, right? And if you're open to it, right?
Yeah.
And you just have to be an eternal student, right? That's another thing that I advocate is always be learning, right? Until the day you keel over, right? Is just keep absorbing.
You've mentioned your work a couple times, and I want to hear about it. But could you, for me and the listeners, start at the beginning of your career and kind of how you came out of school and the different places you landed that kind of put you to where you are now, and then maybe tell us about your
sure.
day job.
So in the beginning, back in the dark ages, right? So I started out life as a welder, basically, and so I was interested in playing around in the shop, and my dad had a little a basement shop that he had a little home business in, right? And we used to go down there and mess around, and I used to get into trouble for using his tools and stuff, and all that. Well, I don't know, when I was about 9 years old, something like that, he came home and he had a brand new welding helmet, right? And so he had let me back up just a little. He had a welding machine there that was part of what he used for this home business thing, right? And it's funny because I think of that welding machine and I know the exact model. I've used it in other shops and I know what every switch and button is for intimately, right? But at the time, I was just into Star Trek, and I used to move all the levers and flip all the dials and stuff, and he'd get all pissed off, right? So anyway, he brings his welding helmet home, and I said, "Oh, what's that for? Is that for Mom or something?" And he goes, "No, it's for you." And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, I thought I'd show you how to weld, right?" And I'm like,
You're 9.
And so anyway, that's kind of where it started, and played around in the basement a little bit, and he let me do a little bit of welding. And I kind of remember him telling me back then, he said, welding is a pretty good job, a pretty good career, right? And then I do remember him distinctly saying this, but if you could weld and machine, that's really the cat's meow, right? And here I'm 9 years old and I still remember this, right? And well, guess what, Dad? That's what I became, right? But I started in welding, and I had some jobs along the way. And when I was in high school, I always had money because I had a job all the way through high school, right? I was working, after school or whatever, and in a couple of shops for a few hours here and there, and doing that kind of stuff. And then a friend and I, he went to the College of San Mateo and got a welding degree, I guess, an AS degree in welding technology or something like that. Well, his former professor or teacher or whatever, it was a kind of a conduit for companies to find, qualified welders and whatnot, right? So he got a call one day that a company in San Francisco needed some guys to do some welding or whatever, right? And And he said, well, they're looking for two. You want to go with me, right? And I go, yeah, okay. So, you're a kid, right? It's like, nothing's very urgent, right? So,
Right.
so we went to this place, and it turns out that it was a sheet metal shop in San Francisco. And so, shorten the story up, we both got a job there, and and it's one of the places that changed my life. And I served a sheet metal apprenticeship there. So it was industrial sheet metal. We did welding was part of it, but the primary thing was there was a lot of sheet metal work, right? And so we made tanks and vessels and electrical equipment and all kinds of things like that, and learned about forming and did all that. And then in that shop, I met my first, well, I don't know, my first mentor, but one of the major mentors in my life, right? Who kind of taught me the deeper appreciation for the work, and the more of the art associated with the with the trades, right? So then after that, I left there, and was kind of bumming around for a little while, and then my girlfriend, who's now my wife, kind of coerced me into applying for it was kind of an R&D fabricator position with the Clorox company. So, and once again, another brilliant move on my part, because it really exposed me to the engineering side of the work. And so what it was their research and development facility, where they develop machines and packaging and just processing equipment, pilot plants, I mean, just anything that you can possibly imagine. And they kind of built for the company. And so that's where I worked really closely with, you'd work one-on-one with engineers, right? And you go, well, why are we doing it that way? And then they would explain it to you, right? So you got this deeper appreciation for those things. A job popped up back in San Francisco that was for the guys that owned Thrasher magazine. This is a skateboard magazine. Yeah, exactly. And you wouldn't believe what's behind the scenes of Thrasher magazine.
Yeah, tell me. That's
it's pretty wild, right?
What do they need a machinist welder for?
Yeah, no kidding. Well, actually, at that point, I was doing machine work, because at Clorox, I had met the second really potent mentor in my life, right, with this old Dutch guy who kind of took me under his wing and showed me a lot of machining things. And part of what we were doing there is, you would build a device for somebody and or a customer within the company, right? And there would be machining involved. So you just start doing it, right? And so all the welders and fabricators there were actually very competent machinists too, right? And they could do their own work, right? Huh. So that's really where I started doing more serious machine work, right? And so anyway, the guys that owned Thrasher magazine, it was two guys, multimillionaires, and they wanted to start a little R&D machine shop that was kind of tied in with their operations, because they had some product development stuff that they wanted to work on, right? And they had nothing. They just had a building with a space in it, and so that kind of appealed to me at the time. And just to build something from the ground up, right? And pretty cool, right? And so anyway, I went to work for them for a couple of years, and it was very educational in that I learned a lot about what I would call the business side of that kind of stuff, because these guys were businessmen, and for all their hip bravado, and they had between the two of them, they had 100 cars, a full-time mechanic that worked for them. I mean, just crazy stuff. Houses all over San Francisco, and they kind of came across as these kind of wild and crazy skateboard dudes, right? But what was funny is when you got to know them, they were like super conservative businessmen, right?
Wow.
They did not want to mess with the recipe, right? Because
Wow.
they knew it was magical, right?
Yeah.
What they had created, right? And they were so scared they were going to screw it up, right? That
Yeah.
they were pretty risk adverse when it came to business, right? I worked there for a couple of years, and then I actually I went back to Clorox again for a while, and after that, um, a one of my customers at Clorox approached me and said, "Hey, listen, I'm starting my own joint, right? Custom machinery, design and build, engineering, that kind of stuff."
Uh-huh.
So I was employee number one there, and that company's still there. It still exists, and it designs and builds custom machinery of pretty much anything you can possibly imagine. And I got some stories about stuff that we built too that are pretty interesting. You know,
Hmm.
we built a broccoli slicing machine. Things
Huh.
for applying and measuring stains. Testing aerosols and trigger sprayers, and I mean just anything that you can
Wow.
possibly imagine, right? And
Wow. Cool.
so I was the operations manager there, and so I ran the day to day shop, which was a machine shop, sheet metal, welding, electrical, for about 20 years. So
Wow.
ran that shop for like 20 years, yeah. And
Wow. So that was a type of gig where it was not the same thing for 20 years, day in, day out. It was different projects all the time, which is probably why you were able to keep interested all those years.
exactly, yeah, you're absolutely right. It was different every day, right? And
Mhm.
I joke around. When the phone would ring, nothing really surprises us anymore, right? If one of my
Yeah.
customers, called me up and said, "Hey, Tom, I got this project." I go, "Okay," and we want to slice frozen cat turds, and okay, how thin, right? I mean, you just start asking questions, right? You don't go, God, why do you want to do that, right? That's crazy, right? You don't ask
How
those kinds of questions because for whatever reason they want to do it, and you're in the business of making it happen, right? So how many you want to do, how fast you want to process these things, right? And what happens to them afterwards, right? That kind of stuff, right?
that's amazing.
So yeah, and there once again, working with the owner was an engineer, and when you're the only one, the only other person there, you get to do some stuff that you wouldn't necessarily get to do in a more kind of official company, right? Where you got engineers and you got designers and you got managers and blah blah blah, right? All that stuff. So you know, if the boss says, "Hey, go over there and measure calculate the airflow through this hood that they're having a problem with on dust control or whatever," right? And that actually came up. That's why it sticks in my head, right? And I go, "Hey, I don't know how to do that," right? He goes, "Oh, I'll show you. Don't worry. Just go take the measurements," right? And so I got a crash course in you know, particle capture velocities and mass airflow and all kinds of stuff that you'd never get to touch as a welder or a machinist, right? Necessarily, right? So that kind of tied the theoretical with the practical a little bit, right? And we were doing, that company. Let's see how many. I knew it at one time. It's around 2,000 jobs a year. Okay, they kind of went through there, and a lot of them were little, $250, and then they could be $250,000, right? So there's all kind of different
Wow.
sizes, but the cross section of stuff that we worked on was just pretty staggering, right? And
Yeah.
so anyway, I did that for 20 years, and then anyway, that's Lawrence Berkeley Lab. That's where I work now. That's my day job. And I don't I don't post anything on my YouTube channel about it. Um, it's potentially a conflict of interest for me, so I just don't want to have to
Yeah.
answer any of those kind of questions. So I post a little bit on Instagram, my work at work, my
Hmm.
day job, right? And then I've given a couple of tours to folks. The most notable one is John Saunders. I don't know if you have heard that name before. Super nice guy. He's out in Ohio, and he came out, and I gave him I don't know, it was about a 3 hour tour of the whole place, and it's turned out to be a very, very popular video. And a lot of people think it's my video, but it's not. It's his. And
Is that the NYC CNC
yeah,
guy?
yep,
Okay.
exactly.
Well, I watched that video, that tour last night, and
Did you?
I was floored, and I basically couldn't sleep after that. Just like, and
I would think
you're
it would put you to sleep.
no, and I know nothing about it, but just for the viewers here, you're a very humble guy, and you're not maybe setting the table quite right. But your day job, to even call it that, there's I don't know if there's anything like this shop anywhere. That's my next question. How many shops like this exist in the world? Is that kind of
Oh, actually, quite
not
a few.
really?
Yeah, quite a few. So, this is a national lab, right? So, um, we are not, I mean, we have some unique capabilities, right? And each national lab has its own kind of flavor of work that they do. Um, but as far as the kind of the complexity and the kind of research subjects and things like that, um, you find this at the national lab level, pretty much
Oh,
all over the place, right? And it's a shop, and we're doing work, and it's really about the people, and
yeah,
it's not about the tools necessarily, because it's the people that think this stuff up, right? And it's like, hey, you know what? We're going to try this thing, right? And we've never done it before. We're not sure it's going to work, and but we're going to try it anyway, right?
wow,
And kind of the inside joke and there is don't fall in love with anything that you build, because it's going to end up in the scrap barrel. And it's really true, right? The stuff that
amazing.
I throw away would just blow your mind, right? It's like, okay, it's got to go, make room for the next thing, right? Ka-chunk, right?
Even like the materials to make it would blow your mind, and then
Yeah,
all
exactly,
of it.
exactly.
So, like, as an example, if unless I didn't get this right, but this is like a place where the particle accelerators are manufactured
Hmm.
and sent off. But this is where super high physics and science requires special machinery, which has to get built,
Yep.
and so they kind of task you and this lab, as it's called, to build it. Is that how you sum it up?
Yeah, it's pretty good. And so the there's I belong to what's the engineering division there, and we think of ourselves kind of as a service industry or a service division, right? So you might be a physicist that's researching superconducting materials, right? And so you come to the engineering division, and you say, hey, listen, I got these weird tapes that were made by my postdoc, and we want to test them at cryogenic temperatures, and we want to run X amount of current through them, and then while they're at cryogenic temperature, and while we're running current through them, we want to pull on them, you know. So and we're like, okay, let's let's figure it out, right? And that's what we do. So we figure out how to do that. So
Amazing. There has to be this understanding between the scientists or the physicists or the engineers and yourself as the engineering, make it happen kind of person that is pretty high level. And I'm thinking about the part in that tour where you were saying something about, when the machine was being turned on for the first time, all the scientists came to watch and they're all excited, and it clicked and it
oh
worked.
yeah, yeah, that's the it's
They're
the
like they're like cheering on your work, but because it allows them to do theirs, and you have to have a pretty serious understanding, to some degree, of what the machine is trying to accomplish, I would think, to even do it. So
sure.
it just like very, very unique partnership between this blue collar sort of like
Hmm.
guy and these white collar guys that you just have to have each other at the same, be on the same page. What's that like?
Well, so it's kind of interesting, right? So, fundamentally, you understand how a steam locomotive works, right? All right. But could you build one? Probably not, right? And um, so, the way I think about it is these scientists they can creep down to our level and kind of explain things to us, right? So that we can grasp the concepts behind it. But I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that we have the deep understanding, right? Because
Hmm.
as soon as you think you got something there, right? You're like, oh yeah, I totally understand that. That's no problem. Blah blah blah. And then you go sit in one of their meetings and you go, oh my
Yeah.
god, the amount of
Yeah.
stuff that I don't know is staggering, right? And you're just like, keep mouth shut, otherwise they'll know you're a moron. The way I think about it is these guys are coming down to our level, or my level, actually, I should say, to help me understand these things. And they're really good at it, right? Because they know this stuff intimately, right?
Yeah.
Like your dad, right? I mean, he can explain, you know, all the different knots in a 2x4, in intimate detail, right? And tell you why, and this is where the branch came out, and blah blah blah, and this is why you want to put it this way, Well, they understand the science behind these things at that really deep level, right? And meanwhile, your dad tells, yeah, Tom, don't put the 2x4 like that with that knot. Flip it over the other way. It's better, right? Okay, thanks. And so that's
Yeah.
my understanding, right? And so that's how I kind of compare, what I understand about that stuff than what they do. Now, that said, there's many things that I know about that they don't know about. So
Yeah.
it it's nice because it puts you on a more kind of equal footing, I guess you would call it, right? So,
Yeah.
and
That's
when,
what I can visualize with it is some sort of like they're probably asking you a lot of questions like,
oh yeah,
can we do this?
uh-huh.
And they have no idea like how to make that happen the way you do.
Exactly right, and and they're humble and receptive about what they don't know, and that's how they know so much, is because they've been receptive to this, right? And so it works out real nice. And if you don't understand something, they'll pause and they'll try to explain it to you, right? And wait a second, why does that matter? Why does that have to be an insulator there and not a conductor, right? Oh, well, here's why, blah blah blah, and they'll tell you, right? And
Mm.
but then they'll come to you and they go, yeah, we want to make this thing, but we're not sure how to do it, right? And you go, oh, that's easy. We just do it like this, blah blah blah. And they go, oh, and they're so happy, right? And it's great when you can make them happy, right? And
Maybe tell us how you kind of got your books put together and what led to that, and tell the viewers
yeah,
that.
so I have two books, and they're both very similar. Actually, one is basically a reorganization and some additions of the first one. But I always wanted to write a book for a long time, and I dabbled with, I don't know, science fiction and just writing little short stories and stuff like that, and nothing really kind of stuck. And then I started thinking about a book about metalworking, right? And wow, that could be really cool. And it's something that I know something about, right? And so maybe that's a good way to do it, right? I started just collecting information, right? And when I say that, right, what I mean is, so if I ask you, um, gee, Nate, what do tell me everything you know about floor joists, right? And you go, okay, and you give me 10 things or whatever, right? And then an hour later, you go, oh, yeah, I should have mentioned this. Oh, I should have mentioned that. Oh, I should have mentioned this, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by collecting is, well, pretty soon I had a pretty good, I'd call it inventory of things, right? And so I started taking pictures at that point of these things as they came up in the shop, right? So as I
Mhm.
had to do them in the shop, I'd take some pictures, and you learn how to take pictures better, So you know this. this thing might not come up again for months or years or whatever, right? This particular technique or this thing or this job or whatever. So I started taking pictures, and then, once I had this kind of body of information, I started writing the kind of the connective text that kind of goes with it, right? But anyway, so I started on this thing, and I had I had a pretty good chunk going, right? And a friend and I went down to West Tech, which is it's a machine tool show in Los Angeles, right? And we kind of end up in the industrial press booth. And if you don't know, industrial press is those are the guys that publish Machinery's Handbook, which is like, the Bible for machinists, right? And they have lots and lots of other books that they sell too. Anyway, here's this guy John. He's the chief editor, and he's in the booth there all by himself, right? So we go in there and we start talking to him, and so anyway, right there in the middle of West Tech, plugged the thumb drive in. I found a couple of things that he could read in there that were, that he could digest easily, right? And he goes, "Here's my card. Call me when it's done." And I'm like,
Wow.
"Oh, okay." And so anyway, I don't know, 6 months goes by, and he calls me, right? "Hey, how's it going?" Right? And he needs some help. And I go, "Well, what do you mean help?" And he says, "We're really interested in that kind of genre of stuff that you're talking about, right?" And so what he did was they assigned what they call a developmental editor, right? I went head to head with this guy so much, right? Because he said, "Well, what are you trying to say here, in this sentence, right?" And I'm like, "Well, it's obvious. Come on, right?" And it's like, "Well, I don't know anything about machine work, and it isn't obvious to me, right?" And then I'd think about it, right? And I was like, "Oh, he's kind of right, actually, right? If you don't know what a WNMG is, this sentence really isn't going to make sense to you, right?" And
Yeah.
so anyway, we started to get along better, and he made me a better writer, right?
Well, last thing I want to talk about is about your YouTube and your online presence, because
Yeah.
it's kind of a big thing. You've got this massive audience on YouTube, and you've been putting up videos for years. And from what I can tell, you got a super loyal and devoted kind of group of smart viewers. And how'd this all come about? And is this the same kind of thing? I'm wondering. I'm paying attention to these guys who are skilled in this one area, machining, who have now also developed this skill of being online and putting content together, which is kind of a separate thing that you've also
Mm-hmm.
figured out. So how did that come about?
So one of the things I'm responsible for at Berkeley Lab is training of technical people. I said, "Listen," I said, one thing that we can do is, we could video this stuff, right, and have kind of training videos, right? But the idea was, you would formulate these training videos that were kind of job specific for some of these things that we wanted to train people on, right? And so the people I was talking to go, "Oh yeah, it's a great idea. Go for it. You should do that, right?" And I'm like, "Good, good, good, good." Oh, I wanted you to do it, right? So anyway, I started playing around with videos, and I said, "You know what? I'm just going to throw some stuff up on YouTube and see what kind of reaction I get." Right? Well, it was like, wow, people want to listen to me yap. Oh my God, what's going on here, right? And that's kind of how it starts, right? Around that time, I was doing something with Babbitt, and I bumped into one of Keith Fenner's videos, and he's one of the old salts of YouTube, right? And wonderful guy. I've met him a couple of times, and he's just a kick. And anyway, he had some videos up, and he does boat repairs, and he's got kind of a repair machine shop, right? So he gets into all kinds of weird stuff, right? Well, here he's showing this demo of Babbitting this bearing, right? And he's just going through this, bang, bang, bang. Oh yeah, and you smoke the shaft, and you do this, and you put this like this, and you put some of this here, blah blah blah. And he's going through, and he's just working his ass off, right? And bink, 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 and now he's got a Babbitt bearing. I'm like, holy cow, right? That guy just gave me a year's worth of education, in 40 minutes, right? And
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, why not, right? So anyway, I started playing around on YouTube, and honestly, I don't work at it that hard. And it's I put a video. I try to do a video a week, approximately, right? But sometimes my other job gets in the way of that, and sometimes I'm just not in the mood, right? And so, like I said, I don't work at it that hard, but it's kind of grown into something that's kind of nice, and the people that I've met and the doors that have opened up for me in relation to that, it's just amazing, right? And I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you guys, right? And some of those mentors that I had mentioned, they kind of instilled in me that the the knowledge doesn't belong to you; it belongs to the trade, right? And I just rented for a few years, right? And part of my responsibility is to kind of save that and pass it along because I'm standing on the shoulders of those mentors that I mentioned, right? And that's how we further the art, right? Is there's more to be gained by sharing and being open about these things than being secretive and guarded about them, right? And we all benefit if we learn more, right?
Thank you so much for
Yeah,
joining. And I really hope, we're not too far away. We're in Southern Oregon. I know you're in the Bay Area. And
yeah. Well, once we get
one
out of
day,
this COVID stuff, I want to come
yeah,
up and see you and your dad and have him show me some blacksmithing stuff because that's was one of my hobbies a long time ago, but I never
wow.
had anybody nearby me that to work with, and kind of mess around with, right?
Well, you have an open invitation, and you could spend the weekend hammering,
Oh
and
man,
you just say when, and nothing would make him happier. He's quite enamored and interested in learning machining and such. So you probably ought to block off a couple days because
Delio, yeah, that's I'm on it. Yeah,
I'm going to put links to your book, your YouTube channel. Are you on any other social media platforms that we should share?
Instagram. I have a pretty good presence on Instagram, and
Thank you again
you're
for
welcome.
taking the time and coming on, and hopefully we can see you in the next year. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks a lot.
Well, and if you ever want to slice frozen dog turds or watch track cockroaches while they eat, let me know because I know how to do it. So,
All right, I'll see what I can come up with.
all right.